welcome back to Drone U HQ. From me and everyone in the Drone U flight crew, thank you for being here. And also thank you for all the wonderful comments on our last video regarding scaling your drone business. Thank you very much. Now, if you're here to learn about drone videography, the tips and tricks because you want to fly smoothly and you also want to do it confidently, you're in the right place. Now look, if you're like kind of how I was in the beginning and you love shooting drone video, but you're just not attracting the right clients or your clients just aren't wowed by your footage, well, then again, you're in the right place because we're gonna give you the right formula to film every single time. There are so many different things that you can actually do with your drone to get great footage, but ultimately you have to be consistently good at your flying. Look, ultimately you can change a lot of different settings on your drone. But really what you need is a succinct formula that you can implement every single time that you're out in the field. That's what I'm gonna give you today, but we are gonna go through some settings as well. So what are we gonna go over in this video? Number one, we're gonna show you how to capture smooth and colorful video. We're also going to show you how to set up your gimbal tilt settings. That way you can get nice smooth reveals like what you see at the beginning of Jurassic Park. We're also gonna show you some common tips and tricks in regards to having a nice smooth speed. It's all in the tips and tricks that you only learn from experience. We're also gonna go over video settings, and we're gonna go over that bulletproof formula that if you implement every single time that you fly, you're gonna be perfectly fine. We're also gonna go over some necessary accessories if you really are going to get the best drone footage. We're also gonna show you how to set up your filming if you are just posting on social media. Believe it or not, you wanna film at the highest resolution possible and then downsample to about a 1080p before you upload into any social media, because that's how you're gonna get the smoothest, beautiful footage on social media. And lastly, we're gonna go over some shots that you can practice at home, but we're gonna show you some tips and tricks about how to do that exactly. Again, this video is brought to you by Drone U HQ. Okay, a little bit of honesty here. Look, your capacity to capture great, stunning video is gonna be based on how much you practice, your attention to detail, and if you set up your drone properly. Now that said, just as we talked about in the scaling business video, we talked about your capacity to get drone jobs and drone business is going to be slightly dependent upon your capacity to get smooth video. So when it comes to capturing that smooth video, this video is gonna help you a lot in doing exactly that. But look, let's be real. If you're serious about getting new clients, your video has to be lower and closer than the competition. It's gotta be smooth. And honestly, complex flight motions that interact with all different sorts of gimbal motion, flight motion, but are smooth, that's gonna be the most captivating shots that's gonna have your clients go, oh wow. And that's what sells. Lastly, if you play with light like lens flare at sunset, sunrise, and you have a toolbox of shots that you've memorized and you've practiced, as long as you can implement, say, those 5 or 6 shots on every job that you do, people are going to love it. Clients are gonna love it because you're gonna be like the McDonald's of drone footage, which doesn't mean necessarily the highest of quality. It means high enough quality that everyone knows what to expect every single time that they come to you, because it's gonna be reliable and it's gonna be consistent, and you've set that expectation so they know exactly what they're getting. So let me give you one tip and trick that I've learned from almost 12 years of flying drones now, outside of Drone U and with Drone U. Whenever I go to resorts, whenever I go to Airbnbs or a location that I love to explore, do you know the best time to film? It's at sunrise. Do you know why? Sunrise is gonna give you that great color and you're gonna have more time to fly. With sunset, that time is always whittling down, and after civil twilight, you can't really get any good, nice stuff. Number 2 reason why sunrise is the best time to fly is, simply put, because even if you're at a massive hotel, there's less people outside. So less people to come tell you about how you shouldn't be flying, less people to ask you the common questions of how far does it fly? How high can it go? How fast can it go? Really high, really far, super fast, I don't care. Anyway, I already saw someone who made a t-shirt with that and I thought it was hilarious. But you'll avoid all of those people so that you can fly with peace and you can capture the subject in its true majestic nature. Let's go over the 3 biggest mistakes I've ever seen drone pilots commit. I've even seen this on Netflix, the Discovery Channel, everywhere. We are all human and we always forget to do certain things. I'm guilty of this as well. So if any drone pilot says they haven't made these mistakes before, they are lying to you. It's kind of like the same analogy of if they say they haven't crashed, they're either not flying enough or they're lying to you. Okay, let's move on. 3 biggest mistakes. Number 1, drone pilots do not lock their video settings. You'll see a beautiful shot at sunset of an amazing cityscape or a landscape, and as they're tilting that camera up, you see the lighting change on the actual shot itself. Look, I'm guilty of this too. Even when your video settings are locked, don't forget to hit that AE lock button on the top right corner of your screen, oftentimes to lock the automatic exposure value setting. Biggest mistake number 2 is not using an ND filter. Look, on all of my most famous videos that have been published by all the channels that I work for and never published on Drone U, like wake surfing, Centurion boats, etc., I always use an ND filter. ND8 was my go-to, even on the super bright days, even over water. ND8 just always gave me the right amount of depth of color and the right amount of light in my shadows. Always use it on the Inspire 2 and the Phantom 4 Pro, which is where I made a vast majority of my money in the drone industry. 3rd biggest mistake I've seen drone pilots make, and when it comes to video, don't make this mistake either, is that when you're practicing these shots, which this will also make this much easier for you in business, when you're practicing these shots, the reveals, the orbits, just record the actual shot itself. Don't record 10 to 20 minutes of footage or the entire flight. Maybe if you want to do that at the beginning of your career because you might capture something that you didn't know was there, that's fine. But if you're ever delivering to clients and as you mature in this drone venture, you're going to want to just record what we call the selects. Okay, those selects are just like the 10 to 20 seconds of that beautiful shot and nothing else. This way, if you ever have to produce this footage or your RAWs to a client, or you sell them to a client for 3 times more than the normal price because they're RAWs, then they're getting just the selects and they're only gonna show your best of your best stuff. They're not gonna show all that other stuff where you're like, oh, wait a minute, I was just taking off, don't show that. Okay, so only record your selects. Quick recap, always use that ND filter, lock your video settings in addition to AE lock, and only record your selects. Okay, let's go over equipment for videography tips and tricks of capturing great video with your drone. First and foremost, you're obviously going to need a drone. So in this particular video, I'm gonna be going through settings on a Mavic 3. The settings in these different DJI drones will be in similar locations, but oftentimes these settings can have different vernacular or can be labeled different names. For example, it could be tilt smoothness on one drone, like the Mini 3 Pro, versus tilt deadband, like you would see on the old Mavic 2 Pros, Phantom 4 Pros, or as other commenters have said, which I love this term, legacy drones. They're gonna be like the Stingray Corvettes of the drone world, always gaining in value. Anyway, that's because those legacy drones can still do twice the amount of stuff that normal drones can do right now. But I will say this, a lot of people are gonna say, what's the best drone for video? I would argue that the best drone for video for the money right now is gonna be the Inspire 2 X7. But in all honesty, the best drone is the one that you have with you. I love this drone because it shoots in portrait mode, AKA vertical video, not landscape style video, okay? My favorite video drone by far is going to be the Inspire 2 X7. That's because I can shoot all sorts of video, not just, videos of me hiking, but boat commercials, car commercials. You can do all things action sports. These new Mavics, like this Mavic 3, this is the Enterprise. I always have to look because there's like 9 different Mavic 3s now. But these drones do not do very well in tracking things that are moving, walking, hiking, biking, riding, boating, fishing, all sorts of stuff. You'll see it when you try to orbit around something on the move. These drones just can't handle it. The yaw is prioritized over the roll when you're flying. So it honestly just doesn't fly nearly as nicely or as aggressively as an Inspire 2. I don't like the Inspire 3 because it's like $20,000. And honestly, if I'm gonna spend that much money on a drone, I'm gonna buy an American drone that I can use to fly critical infrastructure and these high paying jobs like the Free Fly Astro. Okay, we're not gonna be talking about American drones today though. back to equipment. No matter what drone that you have, you need to have an ND filter. Super important, like on this Mavic 3, you will see here, this Mavic 3, there's an ND filter on this camera. All we're gonna do is grab the gimbal so it can't move. We are going to rotate counterclockwise and we pull that filter off, see? Then all we do is throw our ND filter on. I like an ND16 and just put it right back on and we are good to go. Thanks, Paul. All right. Another piece of equipment you're gonna wanna consider when practicing video motions with your drone are lots of batteries. Whenever we have students come for any type of in-person flight training, we recommend a minimum of 5. If you wanna know what's the maximum number of batteries I've ever used in one day, 37. But that was a live stream for a wake surfing event in Fort Lauderdale, Florida back in 2016. So that said, we've talked about accessories. Obviously your drone, an ND filter, batteries. What are we missing? An SD card. Yep, you're gonna need that micro SD card, the thing that you can barely like kind of fit into the back of these drones. That's what you're going to need. I highly recommend that you check out the Extreme Pro SD cards or a U3. That way the write speed, not the read speed, the write speed is fast enough to do like 4K 120, 4K 60. All right, so let's go over setting up your drone properly. For today's example, we are gonna go through the Mini 3 Pro settings on the remote. I will say one of my favorite giveaways here at Drone U are these pens. They're very special pens because they make it so much easier to use these screens. But that said, we're gonna be going over the settings on the Mini 3 Pro. Don't get hung up on vernacular or nomenclature because honestly, the Mini 2 had similar menus, typically found in the same spot with different names, different nomenclature. So don't get hung up if one thing says tilt smoothness on your drone versus maximum tilt speed on another drone. So it's gonna be very, very similar nomenclature, same setting. Now that being said, different drones may require different settings. For example, most of the drones that you would be flying, you can set up in very similar numbers to the settings that we're about to show you on this Mini 3 Pro. But let's say you're super zoomed in on like a Mavic 3 Pro. As many of you know who own that drone, when you're zoomed in, your settings are gonna be slowed down no matter what, your yaw, your roll, your pitch, etc. But your tilt settings may be the same or they may actually be changed in the new update. The tilt speed should be slowed down in accordance with which zoom camera you're looking into. But if you're watching this video and you're trying to set up your Inspire 2 or Inspire 3 or a more complex drone, Sony Airpeak, Astro, etc., know that if you have a telephoto lens with more zoom, these tilt settings might want to be even slower. That was a lot of backstory for that one tip and trick, but I hope that helps. So you need smooth shots. That means that we need to have a smooth gimbal, a smoothness, okay? And you might want to mess with gains and expos, but in all honesty, I've seen a lot of videos on helping people acquire smooth video. I do not recommend changing the gains and expos if you are a beginner. I thoroughly believe in learning the defaults and learning it so well that you get confident to a point where maybe you can change individual settings to better know and get to know your drone. Look, I change my gains and expos on every single drone the moment I get it, but that's because I want it to be more sensitive so I can do more complex stuff with it. I don't recommend that for beginners. So I'm not gonna be going over gains and expos today. Okay, let's go ahead and let's change these settings. I'm gonna turn this drone on, turn the remote on, okay? And what we're gonna do is we're first going to go over max tilt settings and then max tilt smoothness. Smoothness is the same nomenclature as you would see with DJI gimbals like the RS2 and RS3. that would be called a deadband. Essentially what tilt smoothness is as soon as you let off the tilt wheel, it's going to continue moving the tilt just so much so that it comes to a nice slow stop. You can have the tilt stop right away or be very, very, very slow and come to a stop. You wanna find something right in the middle. Okay, so we have our Mini 3 Pro remote, top right corner, those 3 dots, let's click that. Then what we're going to do is control, and we are going to go to advanced gimbal settings. Now notice that I have already changed my pitch speed and pitch smoothness, right? So if I actually tilt the gimbal down, this is full speed right here, let go, 1, 2, 3, and it stops pretty suddenly. So this is actually a nice slow change. I like that, okay? So I'm actually gonna leave these settings because I've already gone through our Don't Crash course on the Mini 3 Pro, which is free to members. If you want access to the largest library of drone classes on the internet, become a member, thedroneu.com. I promise you won't be disappointed. Okay, pitch smoothness. I've got mine set to 9, but if I go to 26 and we go back and see I'm tilting down, I let go, it kept moving for about 2 to 3 seconds after that. I personally don't like that. So I'm gonna go back and change that back to a 9, I think is where we had it. Yeah, that's great, okay? Yaw rotational speed, I'm gonna leave the same. Yaw smoothness, I'm gonna leave the same. Pitch speed, I'm gonna leave the same. Notice in the top part, this is for normal mode. So if I switch to sport mode and I go back through these menus, control, advanced gimbal, this is still just in normal mode. So there's only just one mode on this. Now on other drones, like the Mavic, is it the Mavic Mini 3 that just came out with the 2 cameras? You will see that there's gonna be like a normal mode, a cine mode, and a sport mode. So you can change these individual settings on each type of flight mode that you're flying, okay? Okay, so we've gone over the tilt smoothness settings to get epic smooth aerial videos on your Mini 3 Pro. Now we're gonna show you on the beautiful Mavic 3 Enterprise. All right, let's go ahead and go over the settings of our Mavic 3 Enterprise. Gimbal, enter camera view, close out. Okay, great. Yes, we know we're in attitude mode because it's superior. Top right corner, 3 dots. And we're gonna go to gimbal. And notice that I have the gimbal pitch speed at 13%. If we go to 80%, whoa, look how fast that is. Okay, so we're gonna take that back down. Ooh, I like that 11 better than 13. Now, smooth start and stop. That's again, they called it gimbal tilt smoothness on the Mini 3. So you can see that the nomenclature is literally different. But if I go to 30 and I move that tilt up, let go, notice it keeps moving. I really don't like that, especially when you're filming action sports, because then you can't find your subject. 7 is not there. Yeah. I'm gonna leave it at 11. Okay, so 11 and 11. I know I had different settings earlier, but that is gonna do it for us. One last quick little tip and trick. If you're flying a Mavic 3 Enterprise, you ever notice that your drone goes right into manual focus? Yeah, you should change that. Anyway, tip and trick done. Okay, now let's actually get into taking videos, adjusting those video settings, and so much more. And then we're gonna give you some practice flight moves to really go to town with. And in all honesty, we have so many more practice flight moves in our drills and exercise course at thedroneu.com, again, free to members. Now, whenever it comes to filming video, no matter which remote that you are using, you'll find that there are video recording buttons on the tops of the remote, typically top left of the remote right there. Now that said, there are typically multiple different ways to actually start recording a particular video. We actually have the shutter button over here where we can start recording video. Now I do not have a micro SD card in the drone itself, okay? But if I wanted to record video, I could just press the recording button right there. Now, let's talk about a few things. I'm sure you've heard 4K 60, 4K 120, 1080p 120. What does that all mean? Well, the first number, the 4K, that's your resolution, or that's essentially the size of your video. Now, typically, a lot of videos that you see on your phone or through some sort of mobile device are typically a lower resolution, or what we would call 1080p. Now, this is actually 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall. That's why we call it 1080p. 4K as a resolution is literally 4 times the size of 1080p. Now, personally, I like to fly in 4K at the highest frame rate that I can for 2 particular reasons. Reason number 1 is that when I'm shooting 4K footage, I can actually crop in or zoom into that image and showcase the subject even more. And if I'm actually exporting to social media or to online, I can export that video and still have a full 1080p frame. So 4K 60 adds amazing flexibility on zooming into that image. And if I'm shooting a 60 frames per second, then I can actually slow my video down. I can even speed it up if I want to. But that second number, frame rate, what are we talking about when it comes to frame rates? 30 frames per second essentially means that the camera is taking 30 pictures and showcasing you those pictures in 1 second. So it's capturing 30 photos per second, okay? Typically, drones can capture up to, say, 120 frames per second. They can even capture up to 240 frames per second. Now, these different frame rates have different practical use cases. 24 frames per second is typically what you're used to seeing on Netflix or a big motion picture, which that's where motion picture actually comes from. You're seeing motion through a series of pictures, and that's your frame rate. So 24 FPS is typically what you would see on a big feature film. 30 frames per second is like the internet standard, and that's what you would find on YouTube, like what you're seeing here, and many other places as well. Now, typically, the way that we create videos and edit videos is whatever our slowest video is. For example, this talking head video is being shot at 30 frames per second. So if I want to shoot slow-mo, I want to have a multiple of that frame rate. So it would be 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second, 240 frames per second, or my favorite, the Sony HFS feature at 960 frames per second. You always want to shoot in a multiple of that frame rate. Now, if you ever come to an in-person training with Jake Levesque, he's gonna tell you always shoot in 24 frames per second. And when you're shooting from the air, like with your drone, do a multiple like 48 or 96 frames per second. That way you still get that beautiful lifelike cinematic motion. Now, one last tip and trick, if you are actually filming to go on social media, film at the highest resolution possible, so like 4K, but then when you actually edit your video and export it, you can export it down sampling it to 1080p, and that's how you're gonna get the most beautiful looking video on things like Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts. So again, let's go over how to set that resolution and how to set that frame rate. Bottom right corner, we can see that we're at 4K 60. If we click the 4K 60, notice it's gonna come up and say 4K, or we can do 2.7K or 1080p. And then notice on this Mini 3 Pro that we can do everything from 24 frames per second all the way up to 60 frames per second. I'm gonna go 4K and shoot at 60 frames per second. If you are seeing this 25 frames per second and this 50 frames per second, that is the European standard, okay? They're on a slightly different frame rate because they're weird. Just kidding, they're not weird. They're actually very sophisticated, but we have just very different systems of television. Now, when it comes to filming super smooth, epic drone video, in all honesty, if you follow this one rule when you're filming video, you are gonna be super successful. What is that? The golden rule is you wanna shoot in shutter priority, and your shutter speed should be twice your frame rate. So we've talked about frame rates, so we're gonna set up 4K 60 here, okay? And notice that we're filming 4K 60. How do we change our shutter speed? Bottom right corner, if you click the auto button, it'll actually turn into Pro, okay? And then I'm gonna select the settings here by clicking them, and I'm gonna say, okay, I wanna shoot, let's see, if we're shooting 4K 4K 60, we want our frame rate to be 120, but look, we're inside. So I'm gonna have to kick my ISO or the sensitivity to light up to be able to actually see any sorts of image. If I was actually outside, I would not need to change that ISO. That 4K 60 would be perfect with my shutter speed doubled to 120, okay? The next step, actually should be a prior step, is throw your ND filter on your drone before you start messing with all the settings, okay? That's really, really, really important. Let's talk about video settings for the Mavic 3 Enterprise, okay? What I'm gonna do is top right corner, see I've got ISO, shutter, aperture, exposure value, auto exposure lock. This is the setting that most people forget. If you see a beautiful tilt coming up and it's flashing because the light is changing, they forgot to click the lock button on auto exposure lock, okay? Biggest thing. Now, if I click auto on Mavic 3 Enterprise, you can do shutter priority and set the shutter to 2 times frame rate, which is gonna be 1/60. But if I want a full manual to change aperture, I can go shutter 1/60, aperture, let's go 4.5, okay, and that's gonna essentially change the look. Now, if I move over to settings, I don't have that many settings on the Mavic 3 Enterprise. I hope they change this, because if they just took the video recording modes from the Mavic 3 Classic and put it on this drone, there would be no need for you to buy this drone to do mapping, plus a Mavic 3 Pro to do filming. So if I go back to the settings, 3 dots, video caption. You won't see this setting in any consumer drone, but essentially this is gonna put the video location Latin long on the bottom right or bottom left corner of the video so that it can be seen in real time. Okay, you can even timestamp it if you want. And lock gimbal while shooting. This is great for mapping, not for video. So all that to be said, you don't have that many settings on your Mavic 3 Enterprise, but there's the settings for it right there. No color palettes, sorry. Now, there's a couple of additional video settings that you're going to want to know, especially if you're flying more advanced drones like the Mavic 3 series, okay? What are we talking about? Aperture. Aperture is essentially the depth of field. It's essentially going to move your, what would that be called? The iris, to essentially allow more light to come in or to close off more light. Typically on a brighter day, you could be up to f22, but that really flattens your image and you can't see like multiple layers of the image is the best way that I would describe it. For an example, portrait photos are typically shot with like a 50 to 75 millimeter zoom lens or telephoto lens shot as wide as possible. So like f2.8, that's your aperture, or f1.4, right? These Mini 3 Pros and most smaller consumer DJI drones, they have a locked aperture. But if you're flying a more advanced camera, like these drones or Inspire 1, Inspire 2, we always found that, again, shutter speed is always going to be number 1. We're gonna adjust that to be 2 times frame rate, and then we would adjust our aperture. I found on the Inspire 2, the X5S, and the X7, typically around f11 or f13, you got that beautiful dynamic look where, yes, most things are in focus, but you still had great depth of field. So again, because we don't have that on this drone, we're not gonna show you that setting or where it is because you don't have access to it. The second setting, and I've talked about it briefly, is ISO, or the sensitivity to light. If you're flying at civil twilight, you're flying at night, typically you're gonna have to take that ISO up, just like I showed you on the screen recording here, because it's darker in here than it is outside. In an effort to kind of like overcome that issue, what we wanna do is we essentially want to increase the ISO. Now, when you're flying in daytime and when you have an ND filter on, you want that ISO down to 100 or as close to 0 as possible. And the reason is, if you leave the ISO up after flying at night and you forget to change it, your footage is gonna be really, really grainy and it's gonna look like crap. So make sure when you're flying during the day, ISO as low as it'll go. Now, let's talk about aspect ratios, because I saw another video on YouTube that was talking about videography settings, and they actually called aperture an aspect ratio, and that's not correct. In an effort to try to give you guys the most and best information possible, let me explain aspect ratio. So 16:9 is probably what you're watching this video on right now, or a 16:9, okay? Now, if you're shooting portrait video, or vertical video, that's gonna be 9:16. Now we can also learn from the pros here like Guy Ritchie, where we can explain exactly why 2.35:1, or in DJI's world, 2.44:1, is used cinematically all the time in movies.
And I'm not talking about the small screen. It's not TV, Raymond. As I said, old school cinema format. It's what we in the business called anamorphic, or ratio 2.35:1. And I want you to join me on this cinematic journey, because it is cinema, Ray. It's beautiful, beautiful cinema.
So if you're ever flying on Netflix, or you're ever flying for a documentary and you want that hyper beautiful look, skip all these drones, buy an Inspire 2 X7, because it has a native Super 35 wide format sensor. Also, as Guy Ritchie calls it, the anamorphic look, it can shoot 2.44:1. Why is this amazing? Why is this beautiful? Well, long story short is I've worked on multiple Netflix productions myself, and I will say every single time I've worked for them, I'm always shooting the 2.44:1 because it is in a native format to the sensor on the Inspire 2 X7. So there's my tip and trick if you want those jobs on set. I promise it may seem really cool to you and you really want them, you don't want them, because everyone on set has an ego. It's a great life experience. I doubt it's something you're gonna wanna do for a prolonged period of time, unless you're working for someone like Adam Sandler, which Adam, I'd love to fly for you, man. Okay, so let's talk about color profiles really quick. We're gonna turn on our Mini 3 Pro one more time. Now, if you're flying other DJI drones, typically you're gonna have different color profiles that you can film under. You have Cine-like or normal mode. Tip and trick. Again, if you're flying for social media based stuff and you're doing quick uploads, just fly in normal mode. If you really wanna adjust the color, you can if you want to, but in all honesty, for quick upload sake, just shoot in normal. Okay, so let's go bottom right corner. This is our Mini 3 Pro, bottom right corner. If you don't see the menus, go from auto to pro, and then click down here on those settings, 3 lines with the dots, okay? We can see our resolution 4K, our frame rate 30 frames per second, high quality. We can see that we do not have any SD card in our drone, but notice that I have normal and Cine-like. Okay, so if I tilt this camera up, you can see that we have a nice blue backdrop. If I go to Cine-like, notice how it flattens that color. Why does it do this? It's gonna add the most definition in your highlights and definition in your shadows. But this is typically if you wanna edit the footage in post and essentially change the color palettes to get the most out of all the various colors. One of the most famous uses of this is Mad Max Fury Road. If you watch the color grading of their sand-based shots, it'll blow your mind. So it looks really cool. We also have coding format. H.265 is gonna be a more compressed file type. For newer computers, it'll work great. For older computers, you're gonna wanna use that H.264. If you're shooting 4K videos and you can't watch it on your screen, you're wondering why, go to H.264. Also, your format as MP4 or MOV, that is primarily up to you. If you go back and forth from Windows computers to MacBook computers, leave MP4 on. If you're just using Mac, MOV is the way to go. And there is your section on color. Let's talk about different flight maneuvers or different video paths or flight paths, whatever you want to call them. Here's 5 example shots to help you go above and beyond in getting started with smooth drone video. Now, I will say, if you want more advanced drone shots, check out our advanced aerial videography course, again, free to members. So there's 3 different courses that I've mentioned in this video, all free to members. So check it out, okay? Number 1, let's talk about the tilting reveal. All that you're gonna do is fly straight. So you're gonna pitch forward. As you pitch forward, you're going to essentially tilt your camera up and have it stop when you're level horizon. Okay, now, one tip and trick that I really wanna show you is how you get smooth tilts with a consistent speed. You'll find that as you get better and better and better at flying drones, that you're gonna wanna know this. So here's the thing, here's my finger, here's the dial for the tilt. What I like to do is, let's say I'm tilting up, I'll put my finger kind of further towards the end of the dial, and so I'll tilt up and then I'll lock my finger, okay, against that wall of the actual remote itself. And when I do that, you'll find that my tip of my finger is white because I can go ahead and I can start the tilt and then lock it in that speed as I'm pressing against the wall of the remote and then let it off. So again, tilt wheel, tilt up, lock, nice, smooth, consistent speed, and let go. You'll find that learning that particular action will help you create super smooth and consistent tilt speeds no matter how much you're tilting, okay? So again, recapping tilting reveal, you're just flying straight and going and tilting the camera up. Now you can add deviations to this as you're flying straight and tilting up. Just go ahead and ascend. So again, flying straight, tilting up, and ascend. You can add a variation to that, okay? Nadir imagery. If you want to get a nice, beautiful, clean shot of just what's on the ground, what you can do is tilt your camera down to nadir, which means it's plumb to the ground. It's looking straight down, and you can get some nice, kind of slow creeping shots that just show what's on the ground. This has been used in a lot of horror films, believe it or not. It's also been used in a lot of action films as well. You can do deviations and variations to that as well. One of my favorite shots that I show in subject tracking class, that's 4 classes I've mentioned now, is you're at a nadir position with your camera and you actually yaw the camera to rotate it to essentially show a moving action. Number 3 is doing a droney. Now, dronies have been around for a very long time. People have called them different names. I think some people might have even attempted to trademark the name, but a droney essentially is the drone is flying here and then it's flying away and you ascend and move out. So essentially, to show this on camera, the droney is here and it flies out and ascends to reveal the big, wide, epic expanse of where you are. I highly recommend that you fly the drone through the trees or through an object or something. Work up to that point, because when you add an object into the droney, it just captivates the audience so much more. You can even speed ramp that footage. What do I mean by speed ramp? You can start nice and close, footage is playing at normal speed. You can speed up as it goes out and then slow it down right at the end. Very cool thing to do. Orbits. Now, orbits are by far the hardest motion to do as a drone pilot, but also one of the most rewarding. And when autonomy fails in these drones, as with these new remotes, it does all the time, you need to know how to do an orbit. So to be really clear, this is a proportional motion on the stick. As you roll in one direction, you are going to yaw in the opposite direction. But what I tell people is put your subject in the center of your screen and start to roll first. So roll first and then yaw, because it's gonna be less yaw, and just have the roll speed match the yaw speed. It should actually be the inverse. Have the yaw speed match the roll speed. So you start to roll first and then tilt. And that's how you'll make that perfect orbit. This is gonna take a lot of practice. You can get closer with the orbits by pitching forward, further away by pitching back, okay? Last thing that I want to show you is that sliding reveal. So this is essentially just rolling the drone, or that lateral motion from side to side. Some people call it sideways, okay? Where you have a big object in the foreground of your image, like a tree, and you essentially fly slowly and roll so that way that tree is now out of the way and you see big, wide expanse, whatever. A great variation of this is elevate as you do it, okay? There are 5 great flight motions to practice. If you want a lot more, I think it's like 24 that we have in the advanced aerial videography course. This is one of the first courses that we redid since we moved here to Colorado. So check it out. It's one of my favorites. It's done so well. Thanks to our editors and everyone who worked on that class. That was an amazing class. Check it out. Also free to members, which, just so you know, you can go and pay to get your Part 107 anywhere, but just like a driver's license, it's not gonna teach you how to fly. So if you wanna get your Part 107, you wanna learn operational protocols, which no one has except for Drone U, meaning habits that are easy to remember and that can be implemented every single time you fly and save your booty every time that you fly. You gotta check that out at Drone U. And if you wanna turn your passion into profit, all included with membership. Just one monthly, low cost, that's it. Check it out, okay. Couple of things. When you are practicing these drone shots, there's 2 words that you should get to know really, really, really well. One of them is patience. The other one is grace. Okay, give yourself grace and have patience with yourself and other people, because you will find that this is very challenging. but it wouldn't be worth it if it wasn't challenging, because if everyone could just go out and master it and it'd be really easy, there would be no drone jobs available for you right now. And that is far from the case. You will find that when most people are ready to quit, if you keep going when you feel like you're ready to quit, you will literally be better than 80% of the population out there. It is that simple. It really is that simple. So give yourself grace, give yourself patience. It's gonna take a lot of practice. The only reason that I can fly the way that I fly is because I've been practicing around boats for like 9 years. Okay, I've been flying for collectively like 11 or 12. I don't even know anymore. I don't even care anymore, because you'll find the only people who are like, I have 5,000 flight hours, they just wanna puff out their chest. I would literally invite every single drone influencer to our ranch to come fly through the obstacle course, and I bet it would blow your mind who actually did the best.
45! Yeah!
I don't know who would do the best, but man, I would love to see that happen. You would see a huge difference in those who say they can do versus those who can do. Now, as you practice your orbits, as you practice your flight motions, you're going to want to actually fly different angles or different directions. Why? Because your drone videos are gonna be really boring if all of your orbits are going in the same direction. Seriously, so learn to fly them both ways. I hope all of this information really helps you in becoming a better drone pilot. If you wanna learn how to build a scalable drone business, check out the video that we just did here. Honestly, I think you're gonna really love it. On top of that, what I will say, if you wanna take your drone video to the next level, then the next thing that you're going to be doing is playing with light. Whether it's sunrise, whether it's sunset, whether you have the angle of the sun and you can kind of see the lens flare coming through the lens, and you move just perfectly to get a beautiful lens flare across your subject. Okay, having smooth video, complex flight motion with smooth tilt, low and close, playing with light. If you literally do all those things, I know that sounds like a lot, again, you are going to have superior video than everyone else out there. You don't need to go watch a webinar to learn that you need an ND filter and that you need to adjust the color a little bit and to learn the shutter speed and that formula. I hope this video really helps you, because ultimately here at Drone U, the reason the price is so low to attend our flight school is because we actually care. We've written college curriculums, university curriculums. You don't need to pay $50,000 to learn the tips, tricks, and secrets to actually become a great drone pilot. We care about you and we want to prop you up. We don't want the school propped up. So if you're ready to become a professional, reliable operator practicing safety, and I'll give you props, then check out Drone U. Thanks again for joining me here at Drone U HQ. No, but seriously, let me know what you thought of this video. Honestly, we're here to help and we're here to grow, and feedback is necessary to do cool stuff. So thanks for joining me.